Billionaire mocked his black waitress, but her janitor brother sat at the piano and silenced them all. What would you do if the person serving drinks at your table, the one everyone mocked, wasn't as invisible as they thought? Imagine a sister, humiliated in front of 100 guests and a brother, silent in the shadows, forced to step forward when no one else would. Tonight, inside the Whitmore Grand Hotel, one piano will decide whether dignity is destroyed or restored. And before we begin, I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever seen someone underestimated, only to rise in a way no one expected? Share it in the comments as we step into Gala. By the time the last glass on tray 6 tilted, the night had already chosen a hero. He just didn't know it yet. The Whitmore Grand looked like money had been polished into light. Crystal chandeliers spilled warm gold across marble, and the air smelled faintly of lilies and champagne foam. People drifted in sequins and satin, speaking a language of handshakes and careful laughter. In the photos that would go online later, the room would seem almost kind. Cameras had a way of flattening cruelty into atmosphere. Gloria Reed, black dress, white apron, hair tucked beneath a neat bun, checked the balance of her tray with the care of someone who had learned to respect weight. There was a strip of kinesiology tape under her sleeve where most people wouldn't notice. The wrist had never quite healed right after last winter's double shift. A tiny scar crossed the base of her thumb, like a stitch. She flexed once, breathed once, and advanced toward table 9. "Smile, honey," a woman in emerald said, without looking at her. Gloria smiled, her practiced, polite version, the one that never asked for anything in return. Across the hall, near the service entrance, Marcus adjusted a stack of clean rocks glasses and tried to stay invisible. The black janitor's polo was a size too big, sleeves brushing his forearms. He wasn't on the clock tonight. Classes were canceled for faculty meetings, and his shift at the community center had given him the night off. "I'll swing by and help," he told his sister that morning, and Gloria had tried to talk him out of it. "Rest, baby. You don't owe this hotel your bones." He'd come anyway. Not for the hotel. For her. "Keep your head down. Halls have ears," Mrs. Ellis murmured as she passed. The senior housekeeper who'd known him since he was 12 and too curious about buffer machines. She pressed a bottle of water into his hand and moved on with the quiet authority of a woman who made entire floors shine without ever appearing in a single donor photo. A PR woman stood at the threshold of the main hall like a traffic signal. "Staff out of the photo line, please. Thank you." The tone was buttered with courtesy, which did not make it less absolute. A security guard, the kind with Jim's shoulders and careful eyes, mirrored Marcus's path at a distance without being asked. That was the thing about certain rooms. Their rules tended to enforce themselves. Near the small stage waited a black Steinway, like a sleeping animal, lid closed, the curve of its body reflecting chandelier stars. A placard on the music stand announced that a guest artist would perform later in the evening. Marcus didn't look long. He had a cart to restock and a sister to watch over. At table 9, Gloria set down flutes with a grace only repetition can buy. The man in the navy tuxedo, 30, handsome, the kind of smile that believed itself, tapped his glass with a silver ring. "A toast," he announced, "but it doesn't count until our favorite waitress drinks with us." Her tray didn't wobble. "I appreciate the invitation, sir, but I'm working." "Just a sip?" a woman added, her bracelets chiming. "We're celebrating generosity." She laughed at her own joke, the kind that left no room for anyone else to be funny. "I'll pour you something after my shift, ma'am." Gloria's voice made a long, quiet hallway for dignity to walk down. "After your shift?" The man echoed, savoring the phrase like an olive he might spit out. Well, we tried." He reached for a flute, knocked it lightly against another, and a splash of gold leapt onto Gloria's apron. "Oops." Cameras clicked, drawn to the brightness of spillage like moths toward flame. In every photo, the champagne would glitter. The wet patch on Gloria's uniform would look like part of the pattern. Marcus was 10 steps away, then 8. He set the rocks glasses on a side station and moved, slow enough not to earn a reprimand, fast enough that his chest felt the thud of his own care. "You all right?" he asked when he reached her elbow. "I'm fine," Gloria said, which meant we don't start fires in rooms full of gasoline. She dabbed at the stain with a napkin and made a tiny nod that said, please. Let me keep my job. Don't worry. Emerald Gown murmured to the table, loud enough for the workers within earshot. They're used to it. As in being soaked, being directed, being entered into like some shared public joke. Staff, clear the aisle, the PR woman called, as if the word staff were a broom. A glass rolled and stopped against Marcus's shoe. He crouched to retrieve it, and when he straightened, Victoria Whitmore herself had turned to see what had interrupted her orbit. The red silk at her shoulder caught the light like a stopped heartbeat. A practiced smile sat on her mouth, the kind that, depending on the lens, could be read as kindness or control. Her gaze slid over Gloria, paused on the damp apron, then rose as if climbing away. Everything all right at 9? She asked, not to Gloria. To the air. Air often answered in rooms like this. Someone near her chuckled and made the little fluttering gesture people do when they're shooing away flies that are not actually there. Marcus took the glass to the side station, rinsed, stacked, and breathed. Keep your head down. Halls have ears. He had grown used to moving like water around rocks. Excuse me, Emerald Gown sang to Gloria, holding up her phone. Could you scoot a bit? You're in the background. Gloria stepped to the exact degree required, and no more. Of course. The man in the navy tuxedo plucked $100 bill from his wallet and dropped it on Gloria's tray, like a party trick. For your trouble, he said, flattering himself for generosity. The laughter around the table loosened. Gloria looked at the money the way you look at a beetle that has landed on your sandwich. Alive, unnecessary, best removed carefully. We don't accept tips on the floor, sir, she said, steady. If you'd like to contribute, the charity box is at the entrance. God, she's good, someone murmured, which meant obedient. It did not mean respected. Marcus picked up the bill, not roughly, not like a protest sign, and set it upright in the center of the tablecloth. He was as gentle as a hand smoothing a wrinkle. The lady told you where the charity box is, he said. You can walk it over. It'll mean more that way. Silence can take many shapes. This one was a click of a camera pausing, the guard's eyes sharpened by surprise. The sound of a chandelier hummed suddenly loud. Then the navy tuxedo smiled the way boys learn to smile when they decide not to be embarrassed. Oh, the janitor speaks, he said brightly. What's next, a lecture? I'm only repeating what was said, Marcus replied. He did not raise his voice. He did not step closer. Thank you for giving. The man laughed in relief and passed Bill to his date. Take it, darling. Make us look good. Staff out a photo line. PR called again. Thank you. The security guard drifted nearer, like punctuation at the end of a sentence no one wanted to read out loud. Marcus, Gloria whispered, almost without moving her lips. It's fine. He saw the tightness at the corners of her eyes and let the message land. Not fear, calculation. Rent had to be paid with more than money. It took patience in little pieces. Traded for one more week without trouble. He took the bus tub to the side station. On the way, he passed Mrs. Ellis, who had the gift of reading a room from the edges in. Looks busy over there, she said, which meant I see you. Her hand brushed the small of his back and was gone. On the stage, a young man tested the piano bench height for the later guest artist. He pressed a key, and the single tone hung in the air like a bright thread. Heads turned automatically. The room had tuned itself to wealth, but music was an older tuning fork. David Chun, seated near the front, glanced toward the Steinway the way men look at a painting they've been told was lost. Program says classical at 8, his companion said. We'll see, Chun murmured. He didn't sound skeptical. He sounded hungry. Gloria reached for a fresh tray in the service alcove. The manager met her there, eyes on a clipboard as if paper could prevent mess. Make sure the front stays clear, staff, he said. Donors don't want uniforms in the step and repeat. Yes, sir, she replied. She had discovered years ago that some days were easier if she let herself be a helpful note in someone else's song. Back at 9, the Emerald Woman raised another idea with the ripe confidence of wine. Since you won't toast with us, she said to Gloria, Prove you don't think you're better than the guests. One sip, then we can stop wondering. She smiled like a person offering candy to a child to prove the child was sweet. Gloria held her own smile steady. Ma'am, refusing a drink while on shift is part of my job. You see, the woman told the table, they make everything difficult. The tuxedo man lifted a flute. He extended it toward Gloria's mouth, laughing like it was all in good fun and happened every day. For luck, he announced, as if the word luck had ever once meant safety for the person not holding the glass. From 3 tables away, Marcus's fingers tightened around the bus tub handle. He took one breath and placed the tub down. He would not run. Running invited force. He would walk. There's a way a man can walk that says, I belong to myself. Let me help you, he said when he arrived. He spoke to the man's hand as if it were a separate creature in need of good manners. He gentled the wrist away from Gloria's face and tilted the flute back toward the table. Our policy is no alcohol while on duty. Thank you for understanding. Are we being lectured again? The Emerald Woman asked, amused. The table laughed, relieved to be restored to the game they knew. Everything's fine, Gloria told Marcus softly. Please. There was no fear in her voice, only the history of too many nights and the rent due on the first. Victoria's smile traveled back to table 9, like a drone returning to its signal. She loved a room that stayed where she put it. Order felt like power when you could afford not to notice who paid for it. Is there a problem? She asked, still speaking to the air. It allowed her to own the answer. No, ma'am, Gloria replied, before anyone else could. We're all set. Marvelous, Victoria said, already turning toward the waiting cameras. The tuxedo man, encouraged by the way authority slid past them, pivoted to spectacle. I have a better idea, he announced, rising half out his chair. We'll toast when the staff join us. You! He pointed his flute at Marcus like conductor's baton. Take a sip for your sister. Fair. A little breeze of laughter. Someone at the next table, warmed by the pitch, called, Let the janitor have a taste. He earned it. Gloria looked at Marcus, and in that look was a quivering bridge between patience and humiliation. He didn't want to burn it. He also couldn't bear to watch her cross it alone again. I'm not drinking on the job, he said, and the calm in his voice was the calm of choosing, not the calm of surrender. But thank you. Come on, Navy Tuxedo coaxed. Don't be shy. Marcus didn't reach for the glass. He reached for the 100 folded beneath the place card and sat upright again, like a reminder. The charity box is still at the entrance, he said, and then, because rooms like this sometimes needed a nudge to remember their purpose, he added, It's why we're all here, yes? A few guests glanced toward the door. The moment might have turned. It might have become nothing more than a tiny pivot of attention from mockery to meaning. But nights have gravity, and not always the kind that keeps you safe. Let's make it interesting. Someone from 2 tables over sang out, voice bright with the promise of a story. Heads turned as if pulled by wire. If the staff want a toast, make them earn it. Earn it how? Another guest asked, delighted by the glint of mischief on the marble. The Emerald Woman's eyes flicked toward the stage, and the black curve of the Steinway answered like a dare. Gloria's tray was steady again. Her hand was not. She pressed her thumb lightly to her wrist where the tape ended and breathed through her nose. Marcus felt the old ache in his own fingers. The one no one here knew had nothing to do with mops and everything to do with octaves. He didn't look at the piano. He looked at his sister. The security guard shifted his stance, casual, as if to say he hoped everyone would behave. The PR woman lifted a hand to signal, smiles up, for a roving photographer, as if brightness could crowd out what wasn't photogenic. David Chun, still quiet, watched the room the way a conductor watches a silence before the downbeat. He noticed the waitress's taped wrist, the janitor's breath, the piano's waiting dark. Sir, Gloria said to the tuxedo man, gathering the courage that people mistake for compliance. If you still want to make a gift, I can point you to. After a sip, he insisted, playful, generous, wrong. The flute hovered again, almost touching her lip. Across the hall, a flash popped, and the red silk of Victoria's shoulder bloomed like something it wasn't. She lifted her own glass, and the room tilted to catch the angle of her smile. Some nights you can feel the moment when a story chooses its direction. It happens between one breath and the next, between a flute and a mouth. Marcus set his bus tub down a second time. He felt more than heard. His heart knocked once at his ribs like a warning. Then the manager's voice floated from the service alcove. "Keep the front clear, staff." And the guard, without meaning to, blocked an inch of his path. The flute tipped a fraction closer to Gloria's face. And somewhere behind all that light, the black Steinway waited, patient as a true thing that doesn't need anyone's permission to be true. Marcus hadn't planned to breathe twice in the same silence, but sometimes silence grows its own teeth. The flute hovered near Gloria's lips, close enough that he could smell the tang of champagne mixed with her rose-scented hand lotion. She tilted her head just enough to make the liquid slide dangerously toward the rim, without ever touching her mouth. The man in the navy tuxedo grinned wider, pleased with the tension he had created, pleased that the whole table leaned forward to see whether the waitress would break. "I'm sorry, sir," Gloria said softly, her words so level they could have been laid on marble. "I can't." Her voice trembled at the edge, but did not split. The firmness came not from defiance, but from discipline, a discipline worn thin from years of learning when to swallow anger and when to let silence do the work. She lowered the glass carefully back to his place setting. The man chuckled, adjusting his cufflinks as though he had orchestrated the whole thing. "No fun at all," he declared, and the table broke into half-hearted laughter, the kind people use when they know they are complicit. Gloria stepped back, her tray balanced against her hip, chin still high, but Marcus could see the red line at the edge of her eye, the way her jaw tightened for a beat before relaxing into neutrality. That was his sister's gift. She could swallow humiliation and serve dessert within the same breath. "Why don't you relax?" the emerald-gowned woman said with theatrical sweetness. "One sip won't ruin your shift, unless you're too proud to drink with us." The sentence glimmered like a hook. Pride was the charge no servant was ever allowed to carry. Pride was reserved for people who could afford mistakes. Gloria only smiled, the kind of smile waitresses learn, a door that opens just far enough to usher someone else through. "My pride," she said, "is in keeping my hand steady." She lifted her tray a fraction as if to demonstrate, though Marcus saw the small tremor in her wrist. The kinesio tape held, but dignity did not heal like tendons did. From the back, Mrs. Ellis watched with a face as still as stone. She knew the danger of moments like this. Not the spill, not the insult, but the erosion of a soul in front of witnesses. That kind of damage spread like cracks in tile. The tuxedo man leaned closer to his companions. "She's good," he whispered, though loud enough for Gloria to hear. "Doesn't even bite." The comments scattered across the table like breadcrumbs, picked up, repeated, reshaped. "Doesn't even bite, so obedient, trained well." Marcus gripped the bus tub tighter, fingers whitening. His reflection in the mirror panel behind the buffet showed a man who looked calm, but the tendons in his hand betrayed him. He breathed once. Then again. Gloria adjusted her apron, gave a small nod to Marcus. "Please, not here, not now." She turned back toward the kitchen entrance, but before she could take a full step, the man's voice followed. "You know, we could use a real toast. How about this? If she won't drink, the janitor can step in for her. Family honor, right?" The words lifted like smoke. Other tables caught the scent. Laughter joined from corners that had no stake in the game. A ripple of delight at someone else's expense always traveled faster than respect. Marcus straightened. "That's not how family honor works," he said not loud, but in a voice designed to carry. "Oh." Emerald Gown tilted her head like a cat presented with a new toy. "Then show us how it works, janitor." He could feel the guard's presence behind him, a step closer now, not hostile, but prepared. The PR woman in the corner frowned, murmuring into her headset, "Keep it moving, keep it light." But the crowd was no longer listening to her. They were listening to the growing possibility of spectacle. Gloria set her tray on a side station, fingers brushing Marcus's sleeve for half a second. "Don't," she whispered. "Please, it's not worth it." But humiliation rarely asks whether it's worth it. It arrives, plants itself, and waits for you to respond. "Tell you what," the tuxedo man said, leaning back with showman's grin. Let's make it fair. You don't have to drink. Just entertain us. Clean up the spill with style. Dance with the mop. Something. The words were meant to turn Marcus into a jester, an unpaid comedian in a uniform. A few chuckles broke out at nearby tables. And then, like a conductor raising her baton, Victoria Whitmore herself lifted a manicure hand. The room settled. Her voice carried, trained and clear, every syllable cut to fit the microphone that hovered near her. "Why waste time on small tricks?" she said smoothly. "If the janitor wants to defend his sister's dignity, let him do something memorable." She gestured toward the stage. The black Steinway gleamed under the lights, its polished surface reflecting every eye turned that way. "Play us something. If you can do it better than a professional, I'll marry you myself." The laughter that followed wasn't only amusement. It was hunger. Hunger for a story, for a moment that could be retold tomorrow at lunch. Remember when the janitor tried to play piano at the Whitmore Gala? Gloria's face drained. "No," she whispered, almost to herself. "This isn't." But the words drowned in applause and whistles. Marcus's gaze slid to the piano for the first time all night. His breath caught. The lid was closed, but he could almost feel the keys under his fingers again, ivory smooth against skin callous, not from scales, but from buckets and rags. For a beat, memory tried to surface. Late nights at the conservatory practice room, his mother humming along in the corner chair. He blinked hard, shoved the image away. He turned back to Gloria. Her eyes shone, not from hope, but from fear for him, for herself, for rent due in a week, for the truth that survival didn't come from winning dares, but from keeping jobs. Marcus laid a hand gently on her shoulder. "I don't need her marriage," he said softly, but the microphone caught it anyway. "I just need her word. Her word that you'll be treated with respect." The room tilted. Whispers rose like wind. Someone shouted, "Play, janitor, play." A stack of bills fluttered onto the nearest table. Bets forming, money eager to ride humiliation like a horse. Gloria shook her head, voice breaking. "Marcus, don't let them." But Marcus's hand squeezed her shoulder once. "I promise, Mama, I'd keep you safe," he murmured. Then he stepped forward. The guard moved with him instinctively, but David Chen's voice cut in, firm and calm. "Let him through. I, for one, would like to hear what dignity sounds like tonight." The words settled like a gavel. Marcus inhaled. Every eye burned. Every laugh waited. Every note he had buried for years stirred at the edge of his fingers. And for the first time that night, the room realized the story might not end the way they had planned. The ballroom air shifted as if someone had opened a hidden door. All night Marcus had walked in narrow paths, hugging shadows, obeying the silent grammar of invisibility. But humiliation, once it swells too far, forces a man into the light. The tuxedo man twirled his flute in lazy circles, eyes fixed on Gloria as if she were an actress in a play written only for his amusement. "If she won't drink," he announced, "then her brother can do it for her. Family should share everything, right?" Laughter rippled like a curtain shaken by wind. A woman at a nearby table tapped her phone, already recording. The PR staffer hissed into her headset, "Keep it fun. Keep it light." But the tide was already carrying the room elsewhere. Marcus stepped forward. Not rushed, not explosive. Just steady, like a man measuring each stone of a bridge before he crossed it. He placed himself between Gloria and the raised glass, his body a wall that didn't need to threaten to be solid. "That's enough," he said. The words weren't loud, but they rolled across the table with the weight of something that had been waiting years to be spoken. A hush fell, subtle but unmistakable. The hush that comes when cruelty realizes it has been named. "Oh!" The janitor speaks again. Navy tuxedo crowed, delighted to have more material. "Tell us, philosopher, how do you plan to save your sister's pride? With a mop?" More laughter, though thinner now. Some of the guests glanced around, gauging whether this was still fun or becoming something else. Gloria reached for Marcus's sleeve. "Please," she whispered. "Don't. Not here. They'll." But Marcus's eyes were steady. "No one," he said, still soft, "forces my sister to drink." The laughter snagged. The sentence was too plain, too firm, to dissolve easily. A few phones dipped lower, uncertain whether this was still entertainment or the beginning of a headline. Emerald Gown clapped her hands lightly as if keeping rhythm. How noble! You defend her honor. But talk is cheap, Janitor. Show us something worthy. Her eyes flicked again toward the piano, and murmurs surged through the room like a wave drawn toward shore. Victoria Whitmore, red silk shimmering under a dozen lenses, lifted her chin. Indeed, why waste time with bickering? She gestured toward the Steinway. Play for us. If you can do it better than professional, her smile sliced the air like glass-catching light, I'll marry you myself. Applause and whistles thundered. Someone shouted, Careful, more white keys and black. The laughter was harsher this time, sharpened by the thrill of a public dare. Gloria's heart sank. She grabbed Marcus's arm, eyes pleading. Don't step into their game. Her wrist trembled against the sleeve. You don't have to prove anything, she whispered. Please, don't let them laugh at you too. Marcus bent slightly, speaking for her alone though the microphone carried his words anyway. I don't want her marriage. His gaze locked on Victoria's diamond-bright eyes. I only want her word that you will treat my sister with respect. The word struck harder than any raised voice. A hush crawled across the hall, interrupted only by the rustle of a man's wallet flipping open, bills flashing. 500 if he lasts a full minute. Another joined. 8,000 if he finishes a whole song. Cash slapped against the tablecloth. Excitement buzzed, not admiration, but the eager thrill of gambling on humiliation. I'm not taking your money, Marcus said flatly. Then what do you want? Emerald Gown asked, leaning forward, eyes glinting like a cat's in lamplight. Only this, Marcus replied. His voice did not rise. It deepened. That when I finish, every word you've spoken here tonight will stand. Witness, remembered, not laughed away. Some chuckled nervously. Others shifted in their seats, sensing the edges of something sharper than amusement. The security guard stepped nearer, unconsciously aligning himself to Marcus's shoulder. Not aggressive, just there, as though instinctively recognizing the moment might become history, not chaos. David Chun, who had been silent until now, set his glass down with care. His eyes flickered with interest, like a critic who suddenly realizes he may be present at a premiere rather than a rehearsal. Gloria's lips parted, ready to beg him once more to stop. But Marcus pressed her hand gently, reassuringly, before stepping out from the shadow of her tray. Every step he took toward the stage pulled the weight of the room with him. Laughter dwindled, replaced by whispers. Phones lifted higher, eager now not for a stumble but for the story. The tuxedo man called after him, Don't keep us waiting, Janitor. You got 30 seconds before we boo you off. Marcus didn't answer. He didn't need to. His silence said what his words had already carved. This was no longer their joke. When he reached the foot of the stage, the guard blocked him by reflex. Staff aren't allowed up here, sir, the guard said carefully. David Chen's voice carried, calm and decisive. Let him through. Tonight, I'd rather hear music than excuses. The guard hesitated, then stepped aside. For the first time that evening, Marcus lifted his head fully, no longer shrinking to fit the corners of the room. He turned, meeting the eyes of dozens of strangers, his voice clear. My name is Marcus Reed, not Janitor, not Buddy, Marcus. The words landed like a stone in water, ripples spreading outward. A few guests lowered their eyes. Gloria covered her mouth with her hand, tears stinging her lashes, not from shame, but from the shock of seeing her brother stand so tall, where it always walked so small. And as Marcus mounted the stage, the black Steinway seemed to draw a breath of its own, waiting for hands that had once belonged here, waiting for dignity to speak in the only language Cruelty couldn't laugh away. The murmur of the ballroom thickened as Marcus placed a hand on the polished edge of the stage. For a moment, the room seemed to teeter, half expecting to back down, half desperate to see him try and fail. Emerald Gown leaned in toward her circle, whispering with a smile that was more teeth than warmth. This is going to be delicious. Her words, though soft, carried across the lacquered tables like perfume, heavy, cloying, unmistakable. Gloria, trapped at the side of the hall with her tray still clutched to her chest, felt every ice sliding past her toward Marcus. Relief that he had spoken, for her war with dread that he might be destroyed before the same crowd. Please, God, she thought, don't let them chew him up for sport. The tuxedo man raised his phone, recording now with open glee. Ladies and gentlemen, he announced grandly, the janitor is about to give us a concert. Front row seats, free of charge. The hall broke into applause, mocking and eager. Even those uneasy with the cruelty couldn't resist a magnet of spectacle. Some nights demanded a story, and this one was already writing itself. Victoria Whitmore, poised on a throne of red silk, tilted her head as Marcus climbed onto the stage. Remember, she said, voice cutting like crystal, this was your choice. You want respect for your sister? Earn it. Show us there's more to you than a broom and a borrowed tux. Marcus met her gaze evenly. I don't need your marriage, he repeated. I only need your honesty. That when I finish, you will admit, publicly, that you mocked someone who did not deserve it. The dare had shifted. No longer was it about a wedding vow twisted into parody. Now it was about truth, accountability, dignity. And that was a currency even billionaires sometimes fear to pay. Very well, Victoria replied coolly. Play. If you can hold this room with more than silence, I'll speak my piece. Whispers laced the hall. Some guests frowned, sensing the stakes had grown heavier than champagne chatter. Others smirked, certain Marcus would collapse under the weight of expectation. David Chun, standing at the back, folded his arms. His eyes tracked every gesture, every step Marcus took. He saw not a servant, but a man measuring the space between humiliation and grace. The security guard, still near the foot of the stage, muttered under his breath, Good luck, brother. It was barely audible, but it reached Marcus, who gave the man a single grateful nod. Marcus slid onto the bench. His reflection gleamed back at him from the piano's black lid. A janitor's son, a sister's protector, a man whose calluses came not from ivory keys, but from bleach and steel and buckets of water. He rested his fingers above the keys, but didn't press them yet. The room leaned forward in one long inhale. Tuxedo Man couldn't resist one more jab. Hey, if you break it, can you clean it too? Laughter sparked but fizzled quickly, embarrassed by its own thinness. Gloria's nails dug into the tray's wood. She wanted to scream at them, to tell them he wasn't here to perform tricks for their amusement. But Marcus had told her once, when they were children, and the landlord mocked her for her accent, the best answer to cruelty is to prove it wrong without raising your fist. And here he was, about to prove it wrong with 10 fingers and a heart full of music. Whenever you're ready, maestro. Victoria purred. Marcus closed his eyes, shutting out the chandeliers, the clinking glasses, the diamond rings glinting like cold stars. In his mind, he heard not their laughter, but Gloria's tired sighs after midnight shifts, the way she hummed gospel hymns while washing uniforms by hand. He remembered their mother's voice, telling him, Son, your hands can do more than clean. They can heal, they can speak, if you let them. He exhaled. His shoulders dropped, and his fingers pressed the first chord. The sound was soft, almost fragile, yet it carried a ripple on still water. The room stilled. Conversations halted mid-sentence. Phones tilted higher. The tuxedo man smirk faltered. Gloria's lips parted. She had heard him play only in their kitchen, on a broken keyboard rescued from a thrift store. But this was different. This was him speaking in a voice unshackled, deep and clear. Marcus moved into the melody, each note like a step across a bridge only he could see. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't rushed. It was true. A hymn stitched from nights of silence, of unseen labor, of love held quiet but fierce. Emerald gown blinked, her smile frozen. He's actually playing, she whispered, and though she meant to sneer, her voice trembled. Victoria leaned forward, studying him with narrowed eyes. This was no parlor trick. This was a man laying bare a soul. The audience swayed between disbelief and awe. Some kept recording, their hands shaking. Others simply stared, forgetting to breathe. And Gloria pressed her tray against her heart, tears slipping down her cheeks. For once, It was not she being measured, mocked, diminished. It was her brother, standing tall without standing at all, his music louder than any insult. The final chord faded into the chandelier air like incense in a cathedral. For a heartbeat, the hall forgot how to breathe. The mocking laughter had vanished. In its place, silence, thick as velvet. Marcus kept his hands resting on the keys, unwilling to break the spell too quickly. He wasn't playing for applause. He was playing for truth, for his sister's dignity, for the quiet power of those whose names were never called in the headlines. And truth, at least in that moment, had been heard. Gloria's tears blurred the room into light and shadow. She had never seen a room full of people who had sneered at her just minutes before, sit so utterly undone. In her chest, a knot of humiliation began to loosen. For the first time all evening, she felt taller. Not because they had changed, but because Marcus had refused to bow. Emerald Gown was the first to break the silence. She forced a laugh, brittle as glass. Well, that was unexpected. But the quiver in her voice betrayed her. She reached for her champagne, spilling a drop on her glittering wrist. Tuxedo Man lowered his phone, realizing the clip he'd intended to post as ridicule had transformed into a monument of shame for him, not Marcus. He swallowed hard, as though the melody still pressed against his throat. Victoria Whitmore leaned back in her chair, eyes glinting. She clapped slowly, once, twice, each strike echoing like a gavel. Impressive, she said at last. But talent is not the same as power. And this is still my hall, my gala, my rules. Murmurs rippled uneasily. The room, still reeling from Marcus's performance, bristled at her attempt to reassert control. Something fragile yet profound had shifted, and even money struggled to contain it. That was when a voice, calm but commanding, spoke from the back. Your hall, perhaps, Victoria, but not your truth. Every head turned. David Chun, the quiet man in the simple suit, stepped forward. For most of the evening, he had stood in shadows, observing with folded arms. Now he walked with measured grace toward the stage, the crowd parting unconsciously, as if recognizing a gravity they hadn't seen. Victoria's face tightened. David, this is not your affair. Oh, but it is. His tone was steady, almost gentle. You see, I'm not here as a guest. I'm here as a majority stakeholder in Whitmore Enterprises. This gala is funded on contracts I control. And when I see cruelty paraded as entertainment, when I see dignity auctioned off for sport, it becomes very much my affair. The words struck harder than any chord Marcus had played. Gasps fluttered through the hall. Phones shifted again, recording this unexpected turn. Victoria's fingers curled around her wine glass. You mean to embarrass me in front of my own board? No, David replied. You've managed that without my help. He turned to Marcus. Young man, what's your name? Marcus rose from the bench, shoulders squared. Marcus Johnson. And your sister? Gloria's voice trembled, but carried. Gloria. David nodded. Marcus. Gloria. Tonight you reminded this room what respect sounds like. And I, for one, am grateful. Your music did more than entertain. It revealed character, exposed pride, and lifted courage where it was needed most. The crowd, unsure at first, began to applaud. It wasn't mockery this time. It was slow, uncertain respect. People rediscovering decency in themselves through the mirror Marcus had held up. Victoria stood abruptly, crimson silk rustling like flame. Enough, she snapped. This charade has gone far enough. I won't. Won't what? David's voice cut, not loud but immovable. Won't admit you mocked a woman who works harder in a day than most of us do in a week? Won't admit you twisted dignity into a wager? Won't admit that the poorest person in this room carried more grace tonight than all our jewels combined? The chandeliers seemed to dim beneath the weight of his words. Gloria clutched her tray to her chest, hardly believing what she was hearing. For years she had endured the dismissive glances, the muttered slurs, the way her apron seemed to erase her humanity in their eyes. Now here was a man with real authority not only seeing her, but defending her. Marcus bowed his head slightly. I didn't play to shame her, he said, voice steady. I played to protect her. to remind everyone that she's more than your laughter. David's eyes warmed. And in doing so, you reminded us all of who we are supposed to be. The applause swelled. Stronger now, genuine. Emerald Gown lowered her gaze, ashamed. Tuxedo Man slipped his phone into his pocket, unwilling to share what had become evidence of his cruelty. Even the security guard, still at the edge of the stage, found his chest rising with pride. Victoria, however, remained rigid. "So what do you suggest, David?" she hissed. "That I hand the Gala over to a janitor and his waitress sister?" "No," he said calmly. "I suggest you hand the floor over to decency. Admit what you did. That's all." Her lips pressed into a hard line. For a long moment, it seemed she might refuse, might storm from the hall with her entourage in tow. But then she caught the faces around her, the investors, the donors, the press. Their eyes had shifted. The balance of power had tilted. She raised her glass, voice tight. "Very well. Gloria Johnson, Marcus Johnson. I mocked you. I should not have. For that, I apologize. It was not warm. It was not generous. But it was public. And in that moment, for Gloria, it was enough." Marcus placed a hand over his heart. Gloria felt her knees weaken, relief flooding through her. She had not been erased. She had been seen, defended, honored. David turned back to crowd. "Now let us remember why we gather at galas. Not to measure who is less, but to remember what we can build when we honor each other." The applause thundered, shaking the chandeliers. For once, wealth did not own the room. Respect did. The gala hall seemed to breathe differently now. Where moments earlier had reeked of arrogance and cruelty, now it held a fragile perfume of justice taking shape. The chandeliers glittered as though in approval, scattering their light across faces at moments before it had been cruel or indifferent. Gloria stood trembling. Her tray still clutched to her chest, her apron stained with a splash of wine from the earlier mockery. Yet for the first time all evening, she did not feel like a servant. She felt seen, not because of the words Victoria had spat out as apology, but because the crowd, the very people who had laughed, were now turning toward her with something new in their eyes. Respect. Marcus remained by the piano, back straight, fingers resting lightly on the keys as though ready to strike another truth if the moment demanded it. His heart still pounded from the performance, but his eyes were steady, holding Victoria's like a challenge that was both gentle and unyielding. David shouldn't let the silence settle before speaking again. "An apology," he said, "is only as strong as the action that follows it." His voice carried the weight of authority, yet was neither harsh nor theatrical. It was the voice of a man accustomed to steering the destiny of enterprises, and now, unexpectedly, steering the conscience of a room. Several heads nodded. The murmurs began again, this time not against Marcus and Gloria, but against Victoria. A silver-haired man in a navy suit whispered to his wife, she should be ashamed after all her speeches about philanthropy. Victoria's jaw tightened. "And what would you have me do, David? Hand them my fortune?" "No," David said softly. "Not fortune. Dignity. That costs you nothing but pride." He turned to Gloria. "Tell me, Miss Johnson, what is it you most wish in this moment? Not tomorrow, not in dreams, right now, here in this hall." The question stunned her. All her life, no one of power had asked her what she wanted. Orders, yes. Demands, yes. But never, "What do you want?" Gloria's lips trembled. She lowered the tray, her knuckles white from gripping it. I want my brother to be respected. For people to see him as more than just a janitor. For them to remember that behind these aprons, these uniforms, there are lives, hearts, souls. The hall hushed. Some guests lowered their eyes, unable to face the mirror she held up. Marcus swallowed hard. He wanted to speak, but David raised a hand gently. "And you, Marcus?" Marcus straightened, his young face calm but glowing with conviction. "I don't want charity. I don't need their pity. I only want people to remember this sound." He let his fingers glide over keys, releasing a soft chord that echoed like sunlight spilling into the hall. "And to know it came from someone they almost crushed tonight. That's enough for me." The crowd erupted in applause. This time it was not hesitant. It was strong, rolling like thunder against the marble walls. Several guests even rose to their feet. Victoria's painted smile strained. For the first time in years, she was not the center of admiration. She was a lesson. David stepped closer to her, voice lowered so only she in the front rows could hear. Justice isn't always about punishment, Victoria. Sometimes it's about remembrance. Tonight, you'll be remembered not for your wealth, but for being silenced by a song. That's justice enough. Her glass trembled slightly. She wanted to lash back, to reclaim the throne of her arrogance, but the weight of every eye in the room pressed against her. Pride had no air left to breathe. David then addressed the hall. Let this be a reminder. Wealth without compassion is hollow. Power without humility is brittle. But courage, he gestured to Marcus and Gloria. Courage changes the air we breathe. The applause rose higher, joined by cheers. Some of the staff, waiters, and janitors in the back found tears streaking their cheeks. They were so used to blending into wallpaper that watching two of their own stand at the center of respect was like watching dawn break after endless night. One of the board members, a stout man with spectacles, cleared his throat. Mr. Chun, he said loudly, might I suggest that the Johnsons join us again at next year's gala, not as staff, but as honor guests? A ripple of approval swept through the crowd. Gloria's eyes widened. Marcus blinked, unsure if he'd heard correctly. David smiled. A wise proposal. Though I'd add, he turned to Marcus, if you'd honor us with another performance then, it would remind us all of why we gather, beyond wealth and glitter. Gloria pressed a hand to her lips, overcome. Marcus bowed slightly, every inch of him radiating grace that no insult could erase. Victoria remained rigid, lips pressed, but her silence was itself defeat. In that moment, justice was not a hammer. It was a chord that lingered, reshaping the hall and every person in it. Gloria's dignity was restored. Marcus's gift had been honored, and the billionaire's cruelty had been swallowed by respect that could not be bought. For the first time in years, Gloria stood not as a shadow at the edge of someone else's feast, but as a sister beside her brother. Seen, defended, and dignified, justice had been served. The gala was no longer the same gala. Moments ago, it had been a theater of cruelty, where wealth mocked humility and laughter stabbed like knives. Now, it breathed differently, softer, lighter, as though the marble columns themselves had shed a burden. Gloria felt it first. The weight she had carried on her back for years, the invisible cloak of servitude, seemed to slip away. She stood straighter. Her hands no longer trembled on the tray she held, and when she looked around the hall, she did not see sneers. She saw nods, shy smiles, even lowered heads of shame. For years she had whispered to Marcus, "We'll get through this. We just need one more paycheck, one more week, one more chance." Tonight, for the first time, she did not feel like she was surviving. She felt like she was seen. Marcus stepped down from the piano. He didn't bask in the applause. He wasn't made for basking. Instead, he moved to his sister, the simple boy who had once fixed leaky pipes and swept hallways. His hand found hers, and in that quiet clasp was the heart of the night. Davidson approached them, his face softened by something rarely seen in boardrooms, admiration without calculation. "The two of you," he said gently, "remind us why gatherings like this must change. You remind us of what wealth is supposed to serve, humanity." Gloria lowered her eyes and used being addressed as an equal. Marcus, too, shifted uncomfortably, but David smiled. "Don't hide. You stood taller than all of us tonight." Around them, the other guests began approaching. An elderly woman with pearls touched Gloria's arm. "My dear," she said, voice quivering, "I was cruel in my silence earlier. Please forgive me. I have forgotten what dignity looks like." Another man extended his hand to Marcus. "That song," his voice broke. "It reminded me of my mother. She scrubbed floors so I could study law. I had nearly forgotten her sacrifice until you played." Marcus nodded, humbled. He had wanted only to protect his sister, but somehow his music had reached wounds deeper than his own. In the corner, the staff, the other waiters, janitors, cleaners, stood watching. Some had tears on their cheeks. For them, this was more than one night's drama. It was vindication. A janitor had stood up. A waitress had been defended. Their own worth shimmered in the reflection. Gloria turned toward them and, for the first time, allowed herself a small wave. A young dishwasher grinned wide, clapping as though Marcus had been his own brother. The music, though finished, lingered in the air. People were speaking more softly now, their voices stripped of arrogance. Conversations shifted from profits and estates to childhood memories, to long-forgotten gratitude. The transformation was not just in Gloria and Marcus. It was in the room itself. Victoria Whitmore, once the tyrant of the night, sat isolated at her table. No one rushed to flatter her. No one sought her approval. Her glass of wine remained untouched, her reflection fractured in its surface. She had wealth still, yes, but not power. Power had slipped to where it truly belonged. With respect, courage, and truth, David clapped his hands once gently, as though sealing the evening. "Let us remember," he said, "that tonight we witness not just music, but conscience. And conscience is what gives us hope for tomorrow." The guests, many of whom had come for business deals, now stood in clusters speaking of different things. Kindness is forgotten, promises to change, gratitude to staff who served them daily. Seeds were being planted. As the gala drew toward its close, Gloria and Marcus prepared to leave. They did not linger in the spotlight, nor did they crave it. Their hearts were tired, but lighter. Gloria touched Marcus's shoulder. "You shouldn't have had to defend me," she whispered. Marcus shook his head. "No, I wanted to. Tonight wasn't about what they said to you. It was about what I needed them to hear." She blinked back tears. "Mama would have been proud." He smiled, eyes glistening. She heard every note. Outside, the city air was cool against their faces. The stars above seemed sharper, freer, as if the sky itself had been scrubbed clean. The siblings walked side by side down the steps, not as janitor and waitress, but as brother and sister who had reclaimed their dignity. Behind them, the hall still buzzed, not with mockery, but with reflection. The night would not be remembered for the billionaire's wealth, but for the janitor's music and the waitress's dignity. And in that aftertaste, warm, bittersweet, unforgettable, lay the real transformation, not only of Gloria and Marcus, but of every soul who had been touched by their quiet courage. The applause thinned to a living hush, the kind that doesn't end so much as deepen. Marcus still stood near the Steinway, hands at his sides, as though any sudden move might shatter the fragile honesty hanging in the air. Near the back, a server dabbed at her eyes with the corner of an apron. At table 9, no one reached for their phone. The room had switched from recording to remembering. David Chin rose from his seat with the unhurried grace of someone who knows when words matter. "I'm David Chun," he said, voice even, music critic. "I've heard more students, prodigies, and pretenders than I care to count." He turned slightly, the lights catching the quiet intelligence in his eyes. "I also heard a young man at a conservatory recital about 10 years ago. The hall was small, the piano a bit out of tune, but the touch—" He lifted his hand, recalling it by memory, deep, restrained, like someone already understood that silence is a note. A rustle passed through the room. People glanced at Marcus the way one looks at a familiar face glimpsed years later on a crowded street. "What was your name then?" Chin asked gently. "Marcus Reed," he answered. He did not say was. He said like a fact returned to its owner. "And why?" Chin went on. "Did I stop seeing your name?" Marcus glanced at Gloria. She held the tray like a shield she no longer needed. For years she had kept their story folded inside a pocket no one checked. He nodded once, and she lowered the tray to the side station. The sound with touching linen. Small, final. Told a truth before any words did. "My mother got sick," Marcus said. "Steady? There were bills. More bills. I had a scholarship. I also had a choice." He didn't dramatize it. The weight lived in the spaces between his sentences. "So I left the program. Picked up nights wherever they'd let me. Janitor paid on time." A woman in pearls inhaled, quick and guilty, as if she'd been caught laughing in a church. The tuxedo man stared at his own reflection in a spoon, wishing it belonged to someone better. "And your sister?" Chin asked. Marcus's mouth softened. Everything I learned about standing up came from watching her stand up first. He looked at Gloria. She kept us. She held every small thing together, so the big things didn't collapse. Gloria tried to speak, failed, and shook her head, a quiet refusal to be made into a saint. I did what sisters do, she managed. He did what sons do. She looked out at faces that had mocked her and found them softened by a shared recognition. Family never fits neatly into a gala speech, and yet it is all any speech pretends to honor. From the far side of the room, an older guest lifted a hand. I remember that review, he told Chun. The boy with the warm petal and the slow courage. He chuckled sadly. I thought he'd be famous by now. A murmur answered him, the sound of many minds adjusting the story they had just told themselves about the janitor and the waitress. The truth had been quietly present all night. On Gloria's taped wrist, in Marcus's careful way of taking up less space than he had a right to, but only music had made the room ready to hear it. Victoria's voice, when it came, was too bright. So, a touching tale. She eyed the cameras, as if they were allies. Yeah, I don't see how this, her hand fluttered toward the piano, changes the terms of a little wager. Fun is fun. The hall bristled, as if someone had smudged a clean pane with a dirty thumb. Words that might have been forgiven an hour ago now sounded cheap in a room that had just witnessed a costly thing. Marcus did not step toward her, did not raise a finger, did not perform outrage. He simply spoke into the center of the space they shared with everyone else. I'm not asking you to marry me, he said. I'm asking you to keep your word in the way that matters. He let the line rest where it belonged, not on legalities but on conscience. You mocked a woman who worked with dignity. You turned her into a dare. Undo that. It was not a demand. It was a diagnosis. And diagnosis, when true, leaves few places to hide. Emerald gown, earlier so fluent in little cruelties. Found her voice first, oddly careful now. He's right, she said, forcing herself to look at Gloria. We, she swallowed, as if the word we had edges, were unkind. You deserve better. The tuxedo man cleared his throat. He glanced at Chun, who offered no rescue. I was an idiot. He looked at Gloria, then at Marcus. I'm sorry. Apologies are fragile until someone stamps them into the floor with a witness. Noted. Gloria said softly. It landed like grace and like law. Chun turned, including the whole room. I'm willing to say it plainly on the record, he announced. What we just heard was a performance of professional caliber. You can quote me, but more than that, it was a moral performance. Music used not to decorate power, but to measure it. That sentence traveled in 100 pockets at once, already typing itself into captions and headlines. But for once the captions try to catch up to the truth rather than outrun it. A server in the back, no older than 19, called out before she could talk herself out of courage. Keep your word. Her voice cracked on the last word, which somehow made it stronger. Another voice answered from the left, then two from the center, and quickly the phrase braided itself into something larger than any one throat. Keep your word. Keep your word. It was not a jeer. It was a tuning note, the hall aligning itself to a key that finally fit. Victoria stood as if the floor had tilted. She had lived a long time on surfaces that reflected her best angle. She had not planned for a surface that reflected everyone else. What exactly do you want me to say? She asked Marcus, acidic with the last fumes of control. The truth, he said, that you turned my sister into a punchline, that you were wrong, that you will repair what you can, publicly, with her name. Gloria started to protest the last part out of habit, being named as a cause for women who work in uniforms. But Marcus's glance held an assurance she had never been offered in rooms like this. Your name belongs here, too. Chun, perhaps sensing her hesitation, added a practical mercy. And maybe repair means more than words, he said. Scholarships for staff families. Training that protects dignity instead of pretending it exists. Policies that call people by their names. The crowd didn't cheer that. It nodded. The nod of people who know where change lives on Monday morning. Someone near the doors pulled up an old photo on his phone. A younger Marcus in a borrowed suit, bowing shyly before a piano in a small hall. He showed it to the woman beside him, then to the man behind her. A soft-awe spread, the kind that doesn't make noise because it's busy making space. Gloria Johnson, the elder housekeeper who had watched the hotel through 1,000 nights, stepped forward from the staff line, hands clasped. "I've known these two since they were all elbows and knees," she said, voice like a porch in summer. He could make a busted keyboard sound sweet. She could make a double shift look like a blessing. "Don't you thank them with flowers you'll forget tomorrow." She tipped her chin at Victoria, her courtesy sharpened to a point. "Thank them with better ways." From the stage, the Steinway reflected their small group like a lake does. No hierarchy, just faces arranged by proximity to courage. Victoria glanced at the donors, the press, the staff, at Chen's unblinking witness, and at her own reflection, fractured in a wine glass that had sat untouched since the first air. Power, she realized, was not leaving her. It was refusing to carry her unless she changed how she held it. She exhaled a controlled surrender. "Gloria Reed," she said, finding the name as if it had been written on the inside of her palm. "I spoke about you as if you were an object. I turned your work into a joke. I'm sorry." She did not look for applause. None came. "We will establish a staff scholarship in your name. We will review policies that erase people. And I will say this again without microphones when it requires more of me than a speech." Silence received the words, weighed them, and did not reject them. Gloria didn't smile. She nodded. A woman who understood that promises are seeds, and that seeds still need water. "Thank you," she said. "Say my co-workers' names, too." "We will," Victoria replied, and for once there was no polish on the line, only the work of meaning it. Chen lifted a hand, closing the scene without smothering it. "Then let's mark the moment the way we should have from the start," he said to Marcus. Not with a dare, but with a benediction. Marcus did not return to the bench. He laid his fingers on the closed lid instead, a touch like a vow. "You heard more than a song tonight," he said to the room. "I hope you'll remember more than a headline." From the back again, soft but insistent, came the answer that would be the clip worth keeping. "Keep your word." It rolled forward in layers, staff first, then guests, then even the hesitant. Keep your word. Not angry, certain. And for the first time that night, Victoria found she could say a difficult thing and not be diminished by it. "I will," she answered, clear enough to register on every recording, low enough to sound like a person and not a brand. The chant stopped of its own accord, as chants do when they have done their work. Gloria reached for Marcus's hand. It fit as if 1,000 long days had been waiting for this simple ceremony. Around them, the chandeliers returned to their original task, light without judgment, and the hall reset to a quieter rhythm. Respect had no confetti. It had names and plans, and a particular hum a room makes when it has decided to be better. They didn't clap right away. Respect, when it is real, takes a second to find the right volume. Victoria had spoken the words, an apology with edges sanded down by necessity, and the room held them up to the light to see if they would keep. The chandeliers hummed softly, as if aware that their glitter had been an accomplice to smaller things. Then the first hands came together, not from the head table, not from the cameras, but from the staff line near the service doors. A young dishwasher in a too-big jacket began, palms cupped like prayer. A busser joined him. The sound spread sideways before it moved forward, until guests were on their feet, their applause more like agreement than celebration. Victoria waited, the practiced architecture of her posture intact. When the room quieted, she stepped toward the microphone, but she did not touch it. She spoke in a voice made for boardrooms and had to let it be heard by people, not markets. "Tonight," she said, "I forgot what names are for." She glanced at Gloria, then at Marcus. "We will establish the Gloria Reed Scholarship Fund for staff and their children who pursue study in the arts, healthcare, or trade schools. Initial endowment, $1 million. The number did not come out as triumph. It came out as repair. Applications open in 60 days. A committee with staff representatives will administer it. Mr. Chun, if you'd serve as an external advisor." David Chin nodded once. "With staff voices at the table," he said. "No rubber stamps. And we'll do the simpler work that costs less and means more, Victoria added, almost to herself. Name tags that invite names, not titles. Training that protects dignity. No more out of the photo line as policy. She looked at the PR woman, who had kept the smile machinery running for years, lowered her eyes and nodded. No one cheered the dollar amount. They nodded at the structure. Monday morning had been summoned into a Saturday night, and that felt right. Victoria turned toward Gloria with a steadiness she had to practice all the way down to her shoes. If you will allow me, she said, I'd like to say your name again correctly. Ms. Gloria Reed. Thank you for the work you do. I did not see you. I am trying to now. Something loosened in the room. A knot at the base of 100 necks. Gloria did not curtsy or bow. She did the bravest thing a woman in an apron can do in a room that conspired to make her invisible. She stood without shrinking. Thank you, she said. Say their names, too. She gestured toward the staff line. Mrs. Johnson. Victoria said at once, finding the elder housekeeper who'd spoken earlier, and Mrs. Ellis, and she stopped listing, realizing the list was longer than any speech. All of you will learn them, will use them. Phones lifted again, but differently now. Not to catch a stumble, but to hold a standard. A man in a navy suit, who had mocked with $100 bill not an hour ago, stepped toward Gloria with hands open and empty. Ms. Reed, he said, I was cruel because it was easy. I'm sorry. He looked over his shoulder at the charity box near the entrance. That belongs there, not in a joke. He pocketed nothing on the way. He went to the box and stayed there a long time. Emerald Gown came next, shame reddening the edge of her smile. May I shake your hand? She asked, and something in the room exhaled when Gloria said yes. One by one they came, some clumsy with remorse, some awkward with newfound respect, some just quiet, each of them using her name. Ms. Gloria Reed. Ms. Reed. Gloria. The syllables did what money couldn't. They made space. Marcus had not moved since Victoria's final promise. He stood near the Steinway, as if guarding the stillness they had all earned. When Gloria finished the last of the handshakes, she turned and found him exactly where she needed him to be. Not in front of her. Beside her. He smiled then. The small, private kind he saved for the end of hard days when the floor was mopped and the lights were off. Tonight wasn't about me, he said, voice low enough for only her and the nearest Rose to hear. It was about you. She took his hand, felt the callus at the base of his fingers, the place where a mop handle and a piano share a home, and shook her head. No, it was about us. She squeezed. And about anyone who ever carried a tray and swallowed a laugh that wasn't funny. The line traveled farther than their voices did. People at the back repeated it to those beside them, and a few who had seldom been moved by speeches found themselves wiping their cheeks because a brother and a sister had just redefined victory without a podium. Davidson approached quietly, the way one approaches a painting after the crowd has moved on. If you decide to return to public performance, Marcus, he said, I'll make some calls. If you don't, that's fine. What you did tonight was bigger than a career move. I'd like to play, Marcus admitted, but not to be famous. He looked at Gloria. To be useful. Then we'll make useful music, Chin said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. Recitals in the neighborhoods that never get them. A concert for staff families on the first night the fund opens. He grinned, suddenly younger. I'll write about that. Write about her, Marcus said, tilting his head toward Gloria. The fund is her name. I will, Chin promised. Near the service doors, Mrs. Johnson fussed with her cardigan and blinked too quickly. Mrs. Ellis patted her shoulder. Hush now, she whispered, though she was the one who needed the tissue. They did it. They had. The room began to rearrange itself into something like normal, though normal would not mean what it had meant an hour ago. Trays reappeared. The band, chastened, shifted into a standard with less gloss and more heart. The security guard who had blocked Marcus earlier offered a small nod that said, I saw what I almost prevented. He would move differently tomorrow. Victoria lingered. Power had not left her. It had been required to sit down and learn. She approached the siblings without entourage. Ms. Reed, she said, Mr. Reed. She faltered, searching for a sentence not shaped like a verdict. I hope, when the forms are drafted, that you will tell us what dignity looks like on paper. We aren't good at that. It was not a plea. It was an admission. Start with names, Gloria said gently, and doors that don't close when we approach. Start with chairs at the table, Marcus added. Not after the table's set. Before. Victoria nodded. Before, she repeated, as if the word were a new key under her fingers. They did not take a photo together. Some moments don't survive the flash. They survive because they're allowed to live as stories. At the entrance, the charity box looked different now, though nothing in its construction had changed. People were walking to it with hands that meant what they carried. A teenager in rental shoes stood on tiptoe to drop in a crumpled 5. A woman with a diamond cuff slipped in an envelope. 2 line cooks, off shift and still in black clogs, fished coins from a shared pocket. The box did not measure amounts. It measured willingness. Marcus and Gloria drifted toward the Steinway one last time. He lifted the lid an inch and let it fall gently, the softest close a piano can make. The sound of a day agreeing to be done. The reflected light from the chandelier pooled on the instrument's curve and spilled onto their joined hands. A quiet benediction. Ready? He asked. Ready, she said. They walked out together through the same doors they had entered, but the doors felt wider. On the steps, the city's night air met them with a cool palm. Down the block, a bus hissed and settled. Above, a siren faded. Somewhere, someone laughed for a good reason this time. They didn't talk much on the sidewalk. Siblings don't always need words. When they reached the corner, Gloria stopped, took the folded cleaning rag from her apron pocket, the one she kept all night like armor, and placed it into Marcus's hand. Keep it, she said. For luck. He tucked it into his jacket, next to his chest. For memory, he corrected, and she didn't argue. Behind them, the Whitmore Grand glass doors reflected the lobby in duplicate. If a passerby had looked through at that moment, he would have seen something rare. Guests thanking staff by name. A critic laughing softly with a dishwasher about favorite hymns. A billionaire writing the first draft of a promise she intended to keep. No one staged it. No one posed. The picture was better without framing. On the curb, a car slowed. The driver leaned out. Hey, he called and caught himself. Ms. Reed, you dropped this. He jogged up breathless, holding a stray name tag someone had scribbled during the scramble. He handed it over with a smile. Felt wrong to let the street have it. Thank you, Gloria said, and the man beamed like he'd been given something too. They turned toward home. Tomorrow would be work again, buses and clocks and lists, but it would be work in a world that had shifted half a degree toward true. That's all most people ever need. A tilt, a small correction, a name said kindly in a bright room. At the end of the block, Marcus glanced back. Through the high windows, the Steinway's lid caught a final slice of light and sent it impossibly outward, down the steps, across the sidewalk, toward the 2 figures walking side by side. He squeezed his sister's hand. She squeezed back, and the night, well swept and newly tuned, kept their names. Long after the chandeliers dimmed and the piano lid fell silent, the story of Gloria and Marcus Reed did not belong to the Whitmore Grand anymore. It belonged to everyone who had ever been underestimated. It lingered like the echo of a note held just a moment longer than expected. Not loud, not demanding, just unforgettable. Because respect, once spoken out loud, cannot be unsaid, and dignity, once recognized, cannot be unseen. Some said they left that gala feeling taller. Others said they went home and looked at their own families, their own neighbors, a little differently. But for Gloria and Marcus, the night was simpler, a sister and a brother walking side by side, carrying nothing but each other's names. If this story touched you, if it reminded you of someone whose quiet strength deserved to be seen, share it with a friend. In the comments, tell us, whose name do you carry with pride? And if you want more stories like this, of justice, dignity, and transformation, subscribe and stay with us. Because every voice matters, and every story deserves to be heard.